Hey everybody, welcome back to the Web3 Game Dev live stream. This is where we talk about game development and Web3 all put together, largely for a Web3 game developer audience. So people that are actually in the trenches building these games. We're hoping to help you level up your skills, learn how to launch games. And by the way, if you're here just to pick up the alpha, get the inside track, you're invited. Everybody is here. Everyone's welcome. This is a conversation for everybody. So I am Jon Radoff. I am one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Beamable. We make live services infrastructure. So game servers, multiplayer, social systems, blockchain integration, all that stuff that you need to actually build and then launch and then operate your game. We've got some of the biggest Web3 games on our platform, companies like Mythical Games, which is in the process of rolling out FIFA Rivals. We've got Project O, which everybody's talking about. We've got Wildcard Alliance, which everyone's talking about. So we're really proud of our customers. And today, as my guest, I've got Knock, who if you have been anybody on the various X spaces like Gamified and Simplified and about a zillion other things, then you know Knock already, aka Matt from Magic Eden. Knock, Matt, I'm going to probably just keep using both words.
They're interchangeable. It's fine.
Yeah, thanks for being here. For people that are maybe just getting to know you for the first time, because we've got a wide audience here, developers and even like Web2 people trying to figure out Web3 too. Like, why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll kind of jump off from there.
Awesome. Yeah, I lead gaming initiatives at Magic Eden. I also work on both the entertainment teams and chain expansion teams. So recently rolled out Avalanche. We've got Lucky Byproducts going live on Magic Eden, really trying to find ways to gamify the experience of trading NFTs. Prior to that, I was director of talent and business development at Soar Gaming and 11 Holdings, respectively, in the esports space. And then, as you mentioned, I do a lot of spaces with a good friend of mine, Sam Stefanina, Simplified Gamified, on Mondays and Wednesdays. We were sort of joking off cam before the stream started that I am a professional yapper. So if anything, you'll have some trouble getting me to stay quiet over the course of the show.
Excellent. And you look like a real collector too, based on what I'm seeing on the wall behind you.
Man, we got some obviously books, but a lot of this stuff, like to this side here, these are all like Star Wars collectibles from Japan through like the Star Wars event in May. There's obviously a bunch of pop vinyls and stuff here. And then above, just off camera, is 2 vaults of graded Pokemon slabs, which is my latest affliction. You mentioned like a bunch of teams that I speak to about this all the time. The guys obviously at Project O are big Pokemon fans. So one of the common threads we've got there is nerding out on how much ridiculous amount of money that we spend on collecting Pokemon cards.
Awesome. So in a moment, I want to kind of get into NFTs and how has this changed over the last few years, because this is basically what Magic Eden does, although I don't want to describe Magic Eden. You should do that. So we'll get to that. Before we jump into it, I also just want to say 2 things. Number one, we're going to give out a secret code again today. We've been giving out codes. This helps you earn some Beamable points to go up the leaderboard, which is leading towards an airdrop that we're going to do when we do our TGE. Haven't announced the date yet, but I promise it's this year. It's coming. So definitely move up the leaderboard so that you're in a position to get a good drop from the airdrop. And the number 2 thing, which is somewhat related to that, is we're planning to be on Magic Eden with a little, I don't know what we're calling it, a pass or something. I forget what the technical term is, but we're dropping a lot of these on Magic Eden. So Magic Eden is near and dear to me here because of what we're doing, also from a partnership standpoint. And the last thing I should say is we already have almost 200 people that have jumped in this live stream. So hopefully you're coming here more than just that code that I'm going to give out, which I'm not going to wait until the very end. I got a message from my angry marketing department this morning. They're like, "Hey, stop doing it like 5 minutes or 2 minutes from the end. Like let's shake it up, do some operant conditioning or something here. Like we can't have people expecting the same thing every time." So I'm going to try to remember to drop it into the middle of this. And by the way, with a couple hundred people already here, I should say this is an open platform. Like it isn't just me yapping and Knock yapping. We're going to yap the whole time for sure, because Knock is the pro at this for sure. But you can join this conversation too. 2 ways you can do that. Number 1, drop comments in here we'll ask those live and on the air. That makes it easy for me because I just get to sit down and like cruise control through this thing, and we'll make Knock talk a little bit. But if I can answer them, I'll jump in there too. The other is, by the way, we're crazy on this live stream. Like, you can actually join with your camera too. So if you think you've got something pertinent to Magic Eden, Beamable, Web3 gaming, NFTs, collectibles, hey, post a message about that. Say you want to join. And Oscar, our producer, who keeps us on track through this whole thing, he'll pull you right in. He'll send you a StreamYard link. You can get in. This hasn't been a problem so far. I don't think it'll ever be a problem because our community is so great. But we're crazy enough to try it. So let us know if you want to join in. All right. So Knock, let's talk about NFTs. So there was a huge amount of hype 4 or 5 years ago with NFTs. Everybody was chasing kind of the easy money of like minting NFTs at the time. It's not quite so easy anymore. Like, NFTs are not exactly the funding mechanism for your Web3 startup anymore. What's happened over the last 5 years? How is it different today? And how is Magic Eden maybe looking at this market differently than, say, the early marketplaces that launched during the NFT furor?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it from like a game lens because I think that that's most pertinent to this particular conversation. Let's call it early 21, 22. I think a lot of teams were raising funds via NFTs for a couple of reasons, the biggest of which is that it's a non-dilutive way of raising capital for your studio. Meaning, typically when you're raising funds, you give up a percentage of equity in the studio that you're building. People give you cash in return for that equity. When you're launching NFTs, that equity exchange is no longer there. You're purchasing an asset that is associated with the game. The studio brings in a bunch of funding. It should help them to build their game longer. And the promise that you get in return is then that asset becomes valuable over the course of like the game's life cycle. I think that narrative makes a ton of sense. And we still see a lot of that. Only issue that has come for NFTs in that vein is that fungible tokens are just a much better vehicle for raising non-dilutive capital because they're more liquid. It's easier to trade them. It's easier to offload them. You don't have to worry about owning one or two. You can own 100,000 of them. And it's easier to market make, meaning it's better for people who want to have liquidity for those assets. So teams have sort of moved away from NFTs as that funding vehicle and moved into fungible tokens. That doesn't mean that NFTs are no longer viable for games. Plenty of teams have had success. You know, within the last 6 months alone, we had the teams from Infinigods raise $1.5 million, in December for their NFT collection. You have a bunch of teams like Project O and Avalon and all these other teams that have or prospectively have NFTs on the horizon. And I think that is a sign that there's still appetite. There's still use case for NFTs. And I think games are maybe the best use case for NFTs available today because there is an actual real need to have them in game, right? It's a way to reward users. It's a way to signify ownership of particular items and rare items. The difference is the bar to launch an NFT collection successfully, especially if it's paid, is significantly higher than it was in 21 and 22 for a couple of reasons. The biggest of which is you have this combination of ETH and Sol going on this massive run in their own respective prices, alongside an NFT market that was growing very rapidly. And when you're minting an NFT on Solana and the price of that NFT goes from 1 Sol to 5 Sol, and the price of Sol has climbed $20, the growth on that particular vehicle is ridiculous. So you had this window of like 8 months where if you minted anything that was half decent, you were probably going to make some money. And I think as that started to dry up, as the price of ETH and Solana started to stagnate a little bit more, you have a bigger issue of that growth. It's not there. It's not existing anymore. And it becomes less exciting to people. So people are less willing to deliver capital. Thankfully, that's changing. But I think if you're looking at it historically, it was a little bit of a perfect storm, right? It's a fun way to trade a new asset class. The price of the underlying asset is exploding. You feel like you're a genius because you're making money on everything that you mint. And then when all that comes crashing down, let's say, early 23, maybe a little bit earlier than that, I think people took a step back and said, okay, how do we get creative and imaginative with the way that we implement NFTs? And I think this new era is less about NFTs as a funding vehicle and more about how do we get innovative with the technology around NFTs to do things in our games that cannot exist in traditional Web2 titles. So while there's less volume for sure, I'm actually like infinitely more bullish on games that are finding ways to implement NFTs today, because I think that they're doing it as less of a necessity from a funding perspective and more of a how do we get creative and use this technology in fun ways.
So I'd love to talk about that creativity. Like you have a front seat at a lot of the new ways people are applying NFTs to gameplay. So other than what we know, which is an NFT can represent a collectible object in a game or in anything, what are people doing to be even more creative with this?
Yeah, so I think really we saw the first wave of this with Gabe Levitt and Digidaigaku launching an NFT that effectively became known as the factory asset. And it kicked off this era of NFTs as emission vehicles. In the case of Digidaigaku, it was more assets for that game. In the case of something like Gunzilla Nodes, it was emission of both in-game items and tokens for that particular ecosystem. So I think this is one of the ways that we've seen them evolve. Before, I would purchase a helmet, and it's a helmet. That's all that it is, and I have to wait for the game to go live. Today, they're a way for people to interact with those assets well in advance of these assets actually being live in game, because they serve as these emission vehicles. I think that's one of the fun ways. Whether or not that's long-term sustainable, we'll find out. But I do think that that's an interesting pattern that we've seen, where purchase this asset, it is now a tool for you to get more things within the ecosystem. In theory, deepening your relationship with the ecosystem, making the cost of leaving it a little more expensive because you're so invested within it. I think that that's valuable. It's a cool way of distributing items to your players and the people who actually believe in the title. We see things like loot boxes and mystery tickets and markers for being participants in events. And these are maybe more soul-bound, meaning they can't necessarily trade, but I think it serves as a way to say, hey, this is a gamer. He was verifiably at this particular event at this moment in time. And now teams can kind of go back and look, hey, here's a bunch of people who meet this criteria, a bunch of people who own these soul-bound assets. Maybe we can reward them. Maybe it's early access to a new title. I think that that's a fun way of showcasing the gamer profile as people continue to develop. And then we also see things like dynamic assets. So early days, a lot of teams wanted every item to be on chain. And I think we very quickly learned that that's maybe not the most reasonable way to develop this. So what we're seeing a couple of teams do is, once an item reaches a certain level of rarity or a certain level of durability, or it's reached a certain level of experience, that item then gets minted into a tradable asset. And you have games where the majority of assets are off chain, like in a traditional title. But the premier assets that have actually been used in game or that have some sort of significance now become tradable assets with provenance that you can look back and say, hey, John owned this asset. He completed XYZ number of raids. Nock then purchased it, and he did, WXYX with it. So I think that this is an interesting way of showing history between items as well. And it's really much more developed from ultimately what was just like, hey, buy this pass. It's effectively just a funding mechanism for us, and we promise you something in return downstream.
I'd love to talk about that history aspect in a moment. One thing, we're getting like a zillion comments asking, like, how do you get the code? How do you get the code? Like, a lot. That's awesome. I'm glad you guys are super engaged. You want to claim your Beamable code. You got to join the Discord. So the way you get that, you have to be in our Discord server for Beamable Network. If you don't know what that is, just look at Beamable Network on X. You can find it there. And then use the /claim command. It isn't the code that Oscar's posting there right now. It's actually going to be a different code. So you're going to have to wait for that, because I think Oscar did a cut and paste from previous version of this. But just be in the Discord and ready to hear that, and then you'll be able to get it. And we're starting to get some questions too from the audience about NFTs and stuff. But like, while we're on the subject of history, one of the things that I was always intrigued by with NFTs is, for the first time, you have the ability to have provenance on a digital asset that isn't just locked up in someone else's platform. Like, you can trade items in some games, like in an MMO, for example. A lot of soul-bound items exist, but there's also tradable items as well. And, that's okay. Like, maybe you know who originally crafted the item, but the idea of knowing that an item passed through a set of hands and acquires history through those transfers, I think is really interesting, because there's a lot of intangible value there. And it feels like there's a connection to esports as well. Like if an item was used in an esports competition, I think it gets like a halo effect. Just like you have a bunch of objects on the wall behind you, like there's a lot of reasons things gain in value. One in gaming is just the intrinsic value of the item in terms of what it does for you in the game. If it's helpful for leveling up, for example, that has some value. But as we know from Counter-Strike skins, like that's only one thing that people care about. People care about aesthetics. People care about rarity. People should probably care about history. I'm curious what you're seeing in that respect as well.
Yeah, so I think that this is, and I agree, right? Big esports guy, coach professional Valorant, huge diehard traditional sports fan as well. So memorabilia and collectibles, I think that is like second nature to me. I understand the value of, hey, this is the bat that Jose Bautista used during the iconic Toronto bat flip in the World Series finals, right? Like these are things that I think matter to fans of that particular sport. I do think we get to that level with Web3 titles and NFTs, but it also has this massive dependency on that game being valuable, something mattering to the people who play that game. The idea that you can ship an asset as saying, one day this will be valuable because one day this game will blow up and because one day 1 million people will play it, I think is a difficult sell for people who are maybe skeptical of NFTs. That being said, if you said, so in my time in I'll give you a real life example. In my time in Valorant, we were at a Worlds tournament, one of the top tournaments that happen every year with regionals, and a player from Indonesia named Padifan basically used a mechanic that we hadn't seen before. He used the wall in a way that nobody had used it. He got himself to above a perch, shot over the wall, got it like a 4K, and the crowd went wild. But one of the things that happened as a downstream effect of that was the skin that he was using became incredibly popular in game. And when it next reached the shop, a bunch of people purchased it. And if you were playing after this event with Padifan, almost every player, especially in lower ranks that you saw, was wearing the skin because they wanted to emulate the guy that just did this on front of 250,000 people. That is an incredibly impactful moment. And you saw the downstream effect of people wanting to emulate what happened. But imagine you can own the actual skin. It's no longer just a replica. It is the skin that Padifan used during that gaming moment. That would be invaluable for people who are fans of professional Valorant. And I think that experience makes sense to people. What we need for that to happen is we need for something like Project O or Wildcard to become that game that people no longer just play, but are emotionally invested in what happens in the lore and the history of that title. Once that happens, I think this idea of caring about owning an asset that Jon owned, that becomes more compelling because now the game matters. I think the issue that we've had to date with like this story of provenance is that we start with the provenance and we don't start with the game matters. And if the game doesn't matter, it doesn't matter to me that I own the asset, and it doesn't matter to me that I know that Oscar and Jon touched it. I don't care because the game doesn't matter. So if we can start with the game, then all of this becomes a very compelling sell. And I think luckily, a lot of the titles that you just named as clients of Beamable are titles that like I have both personally spent time and energy on making sure that they succeed, as well as like actually invested my own dollars because I believe in the team and the vision that's going on there. So I'm aligned in the bet that those are probably teams that are able to execute on the vision that we're talking about here.
If anyone's interested in this subject, and another company that's working on this, so there's a game developer named Dennis Dyack, who, if you've been around AAA gaming, you may know him. He was involved in really famous titles like Legacy of Kain is a title that he worked on, and he has a Web3 studio today. So one cool thing, like here's another AAA game developer getting involved in Web3 because he fundamentally believes in it. And the application, one of several applications of Web3 he thought was interesting, is this idea of history and accumulating the history of all the items in the game, and even using things like generative AI to digest like histories of how the item was used, what happened with it, how did it affect the world, who's had it, things like that. So I thought it is a really interesting way to add value to the history and almost start generating a lore within the game. I don't know, Oscar, if you can locate that previous episode and share it with folks in the stream who might want to check that out. But I actually did the conversation with him at during GDC. He came up to us. We covered that. It was pretty cool. So one of our questions from the audience here is around like the typical barriers to NFTs and how you're looking at that today, which I think is, I mean, this is not just a Magic Eden or marketplace problem. It's just a general Web3 onboarding problem. But Downey, and thanks Downey for asking the question. We really appreciate anyone who asks questions here. And I noticed that you've been around for previous episodes as well. Thanks for joining via YouTube. But you're asking, what are the biggest obstacles you see when trying to educate traditional gamers about concepts like wallets, gas fees, and NFTs? I have my own thoughts on this, Knock, but where are we with this?
Yeah, we're still, I think, struggling a little bit to sort of identify this. I think on a positive note, right? Things like gas fees are not as relevant today as they were in 2022. With teams building proper L2s, L3s even exist, things like B3 on base. The marginal cost of purchasing an asset or transferring an asset is no longer in the dollars. It's a couple of cents. So I think from like an onboarding perspective, that's a much easier sell to understand that, hey, in order to transfer this thing, you have to pay X amount of money. It's typically 3 or 4 cents if you're on an L2. It's even cheaper on something like a B3. So that is okay. I think users are accustomed to taxes and fees. I really don't think that gas should be a deterrent any longer, because if anything, it's cheaper than the sales tax that you're purchasing on something from Steam. It's cheaper than the cost of the 3% fee that Steam Marketplace takes or some of these black market sites take when you're selling CSGO skins. So I do think it's relatively insignificant now. Wallets, I think, become maybe a bigger barrier. Plenty of teams are approaching this different ways. You see things like Privy and a couple of other like social sign-on websites where you basically connect with like an X account or a Gmail account or a Facebook account, and it spins up a wallet for you. They custody assets. You're able to just play the game. You pay like you would, typically with credit card. You plug in your MasterCard or your Visa or your Amex or whatever, and you're able to make purchases in the game for a wallet that is controlled by the game that you're playing. Where I think the biggest hurdle is educating users on the requirement or the need or the benefits of self-custodying your assets, right? How do you take control of your own assets using your own keys through something like a MetaMask or Phantom? I don't have the answer to what that looks like long-term, but I know that that's the next big step in making people feel very confident in the fact that they actually own these items, is when you remove the need for custodian experiences. I think it's beneficial for games to offer it for people who are coming from Web 2. But I think long-term, if you want people to be real Web3 users, you have to teach them how to do Web3 things. And that includes building and setting up and funding and managing a wallet. From an NFT perspective, I actually don't think that this requires much education. I think it needs more exposure. The concept of purchasing an asset is not unfamiliar for gamers. If you've played a bunch, I spent thousands of dollars on Valorant skins and League of Legends skins, and those are effectively the same types of purchases that I would be making with NFTs. The difference is I now control the asset or the actual underlying token, right? I can take it off platform. I can sell it. I can trade it to John off of the game that we're actually playing if I wanted to do so. And I think that level of ownership becomes compelling when the game is compelling, right? If I can own my Valorant skins, well, now you see what that looks like in a CSGO economy. But I don't maybe care as much about owning skins in a game that isn't doing well, because what's the point of ownership in a game that there is no underlying value in that asset? I think NFTs are the easiest thing to explain to people from traditional Web2 gaming experiences. The biggest hurdle is removing the stigma around crypto. And this is something that we see a ton of when you're talking about traditional gamers. I think OTG did a very good thing with some of these tournaments where you had people like Shroud and Tim the Tatman and a bunch of these major streamers talking about the ownership of assets and how you can trade it. And you sort of watch them in real time figure out that this isn't as bad as maybe I thought it was. Maybe this crypto thing isn't so negative. It's like, oh, we can own this, and I just picked up this item in game and now I can sell it to Tim. That's pretty cool. what they're describing is blockchain transactions. They don't know it yet. So I think it'll take a combination of more exposure, so velocity of games and the number of games that are available that implement Web3 tools makes it easier to understand a little bit because you see it in 10 or 15 different places. And I think maybe the most important piece is one true breakout. Maybe it's a Project O, maybe it's a wild card, a game that is so good and so compelling that you can't ignore it. And when you play it, you want to participate in the blockchain activities around it because that adds to the level of content and the experience there. So I think it'll take one of these big blow up games to sort of make people pay a little more attention. But NFTs, I think, are the easiest. In order, it's wallets at the top is the absolute hardest thing. I think NFTs and gas fees, frankly, are like insignificant when it comes to, onboarding, because it's something that most people are already doing.
The fundamental problem with gas fees really comes down to if you're a brand new user having anything in the wallet, right?
Exactly.
Like you can get a wallet set up, but if your process now is, I got to sign up for, pick your favorite centralized exchange, Coinbase or whatever, and now you have to buy some of that token and ship it off to your wallet, you'll have a waiting time while they go through KYC and all that bullshit. And then like eventually, I don't know, 10 days later, you have a currency in your wallet to even do some of the minimal gas fees that you could run into. So it tends to be, I think, a real speed bump for new people in the space. The thing that we've been seeing at Beamable that has been successful for a lot of our developers really is just kicking the can down the road a little bit in terms of when they even need to think about that. I think it's not unlike what you were just referring to. So just have a fun game, have items in it. Items that you receive as a player can be used in the game immediately without having a wallet. Hold it for them and allow them to claim the NFT later for those items that are valuable. So sort of like a deferred claim-based process, which only really becomes relevant to them at the point they're chatting with someone in the game and they're like, hey, you have a cool item. Did you know that someone else would be willing to pay you for that? Or buy it from you. And by the way, there's also a place where you can get more items like that. I think people get acculturated to that socially that way, in a way that they are a lot more willing to then set up the wallet, get currency into the wallet, all those added steps, versus push those things forward and bring them up in the experience. And we're seeing that, I think most of our customers now, Mythical is actually a good one leading the pack because they're the onboarding process there is via mobile, right? So you think of like a typical iOS or Android game to play NFL Rivals or now FIFA Rivals, which is in the process of rolling out. Like you don't have to have any of that stuff set up to start playing and enjoying the game. Later, if you want to be in the marketplaces and trade, you'll have to have something like that, but it's kind of deferred till later. But it also brings up a related point, and then I'd love you to respond to both of them in tandem in whatever order you want, is there's also been a lot of recent news around like the court orders with Apple, which has changed a lot of like what third-party selling sites are now going to be participating in that, thanks to Epic kind of leading that charge and making it, ultimately so that Apple is going to have to open up their ecosystem a lot more in terms of payments and marketplaces and whatnot. A lot of people in crypto have realized, hey, this is now the moment where you could ship a game on iOS and maybe it's going to allow direct integration to marketplaces. I've got to imagine that's a game changer for Magic Eden, right? So like, think about either of those that you want to think of. It's onboarding. It's also change to the ecosystem with respect to Apple and what they're now going to be required to do most likely.
Yeah, so I think the Apple thing is pretty interesting. Previously, a lot of the changes that you see happen within the Apple ecosystem actually comes from EU circuit courts. It doesn't come from America because it's a little more difficult to press those advantages that they have in EU that they don't have in the US. So things like Apple removing Lightning ports and moving to the more universal USB-C, things like the ability to allow third-party creators to build peripheral products for your Apple products. I think that's been like a net benefit to the Apple ecosystem and to the consumer. I think with the Apple App Store thing, it's a more interesting case because it happened in the United States. The entire process was done in US courts. It did pass It looks like it's back in review now, so we'll see what ends up happening. In a world where this does pass and this change is forced, I think what you've seen historically from crypto teams is setting up not IAPs, in-app purchases are done a little bit differently, right? Your app is a downloadable thing. You're effectively, I can't remember the exact name for it, but you're effectively just downloading the product to your home screen of your phone. And it's an app in the sense that you can open it and play the game, but it's not an app in the sense that you've downloaded from the Apple App Store. And that's the way that these teams have attempted. Yes, thank you. That's the way that these teams have attempted to get around the Apple tax. I think in a world where that is baked into the Apple App Store distribution center, of course, that becomes more compelling for people building mobile games, right? A lot of teams are doing like almost like a segmented or separated experience. So you play the game on mobile, and here's like this Web3 component that you can do on web, but you can't actually activate it from your mobile game. That's not a great experience for users. And I think the ability for those two things to sort of combine obviously is compelling for developers. From like a Magic Eden perspective, one of the things that we do a lot with teams is we believe in unified liquidity pools, right? So historically, the way that games would spin up, or the way that a bunch of platforms would spin up, is, there'd be a liquidity pool on Magic Eden, and then there would be a liquidity pool on some other marketplace, and then the game has their own marketplace. And now if you're a trader of those games, you have to check 3 different locations to see where's the best place for me to sell this asset. What we've begun doing is, aggregating a couple of other marketplaces. We allow our API to be called into games. In a world where a gamer can now play a game on mobile that they've downloaded from the Apple App Store, that game has the ability to sell assets. It has the ability to pull in Magic Eden's marketplace API and provide the instant liquidity of a proper marketplace in crypto to people who are playing on the game. I think that is another like 10 steps closer to the seamless experience that you're expecting when you're playing a traditional Web2 title. I'm cautiously optimistic is the way that I'll put it, that this works out the way that we've just outlined, right? I think we've seen places like Apple be pretty defensive of what effectively is a monopoly between Apple and the Google Play Store. Those are really the only 2 places, if you're a mobile app, that you can develop and release your app to any amount of distribution. In a world where you're not taxed at 30% of every dollar, I think that becomes an opportunity for people to be more innovative and incentivized these people to spend more money and building these games and building these systems and delivering us cool products. So I hope it plays out this way. I hope it's held up in court. Like we've seen in the past, it's been better for consumers when Apple gets forced to use something like USB-C instead of their proprietary tech in Lightning. My belief is that it'll be the same thing here. If Apple is no longer able to take 30% of every dollar, you're going to see teams want to spend more money on trying more innovative things. Now the calculation is, well, we have to spend X amount of dollars on marketing, and then our ROI is slashed by 30% right out of the get-go. So that marketing needs to be that more impactful. It's burden. It's a burden on developers. So I'm hoping that changes. And obviously Magic Eden would love to power more teams through, API, our marketplace API, and things like minting NFTs and whatnot. So yeah, the more access to that, the better, I think.
So you kind of brought up the topic of business models and how much goes back to the creators. So I want to talk about that for a moment. But before we do, I promised that I would give you the code for today. So we got to we have over 800 people in the live audience. So you're a popular guy, Knock. Everyone showed up to hear your yapping today. So thanks for drawing such a huge audience. But thank you, all of you in the community, for showing up for this. We couldn't do any of this without you. And we're really grateful for the time that you take to come and listen to us talk and hopefully learn a couple of things, maybe pick up some alpha along the way. And the numbers have just been going up and up and up on this live stream. So super, super excited to have you all here. Okay, so we're going to give that code out. Oscar, get ready to give it out. And you got to be on Discord. This is the last 2 minutes you've got. So if you haven't done it yet, jump onto the Discord, log in, verify yourself, and then you're going to use /game to do it. The code today is LEADER. That is spelled LEADER. And you can see it on that little ticker going along the bottom there. It has the instructions. You got to go to Beamable Networks. Okay, we have 2 Discords just to make things extra confusing. The Beamable Discord, that's for game developers. If you're in there and you care about tokens and leaderboards and community questing for the DPIN, you're in the wrong place, because that's for game developers building a game. And actually they get a little they get a little annoyed when like the channel floods with like one token and those kind of questions. Like they're just trying to build games, guys. Go to Beamable Network. That's the DeepIn site. That's where you can do it. And that's where you also learn about everything. Yep. Go claim leader. That's where you go. Okay. So you mentioned the idea that if there's less of a fee, which I think of as like the Apple tax, the 30% Apple tax. And Apple's not the only one, by the way. Like Google has a tax, Facebook has a tax, Steam has a tax. Every one of these has a tax. So like, I don't even mean to single out Apple, but Apple just sort of is like the biggest company at this point. So they kind of get targeted with more complaints about this. But everyone has their tax. It's true that like when you're a game developer, something that takes an immediate 30% bite out of your revenue is really, really significant. Like it means you're going to have fewer degrees of freedom for trying things out. It's less money that's going to go right back into the innovation of the game, because you're basically paying a distribution charge. And yes, 20 years ago, Walmart charged 60% to be on a store shelf, but it isn't 20 years ago. It's today. There's a lot more game developers. There's a lot of people that I think would like to do more creative things, and that 30% eats up a lot. And in my opinion, frankly, like these companies aren't doing enough for that 30%. If they were doing a lot to help you launch your game, that'd be a little bit different. When I launched Game of Thrones on the App Store, Jesus, when was that? 12 years ago or something. It was like a venture capital round. Like we launched and like money just poured in. We funded the company for a while off of just an App Store feature. That hasn't been the way it has been for a few years. Like the 30% really is kind of a tax now relative to what they do for you. There's that aspect, but there's also the idea that's kind of unique to NFTs, which is creator royalties. So this has been like all over the place the last few years. Like I remember when NFTs first launched in 2020. Well, they existed before then, but they kind of started getting hyped in 2020, 2021. A big claim of this was that creator royalties would be a new funding model. Like you wouldn't have to charge people a subscription fee for the game anymore. You just fund game operations off of creator royalties. So two forms of funding. The first, NFT Mint, which funded them, and then creator royalties could provide like the steady income over time. And then, of course, people started getting rid of royalties. You had vampire attacks on marketplaces. Like it was just all over the place. And it ended up being proven that like just the smart contracts to enforce that long term is like super hard to do in a open permissionless ecosystem. What's the state of that today, and how do you think about that? Is it a funding mechanism? Is it a nice to have? Should creators care about this anymore?
I think the short answer is that it's probably messier today than it's ever been. I'll kind of give like, I love my history lessons, so I'll kind of walk you through it. I think originally the promise of creator royalties, most people did not realize was effectively like a social agreement, right? John, as the deployer of a contract, says, I would like 5% of every sale to go back to me as a creator. Magic Eden and similar marketplaces would then say, yep, that's the way that we'll enforce it on chain. And if Oscar made a purchase on Magic Eden, John would get a 5% kickback. That was the social agreement. But that wasn't actually enforced on the blockchain. That was enforced via front ends of marketplaces like Magic Eden. You then had a marketplace called YA who said, well, I disagree fundamentally with this idea of like a handshake agreement that every time I sell something, I'm going to earn, a percentage of that fee, or the creator gets a percentage of the fee. And as a trader, that means, if my $100 item, I sell it, I'm actually at best going to get 94.5 after the royalty for the creator and the marketplace fee. So why don't I just trade on a marketplace that circumvents that handshake agreement? And now instead of $94.5, I get $99.5, and I no longer have to pay the creator. Obviously, this made everybody kind of look at it and go, wow, we thought that this was enforced on chain. We thought that this was a promise of blockchain, and this became rapidly exploited. And the growth of people who were trading on non-royalty enforcing marketplaces was basically zero. And then YA and a couple of others came into play, and it was basically a 90-degree angle straight up. Everybody started trading on it because as a trader, as a speculator, why would you not want to maximize the dollars that you potentially could make on the asset that you own? This obviously created a wild amount of conversation about this on whether or not it's sustainable, whether or not it's something that should happen. And I think over time, we have found ways to, with the help of Metaplex and a couple of other creators, found ways to enforce royalties on Solana. Gabe Layden and the team at Limit Break have created the 721C standard, which allows you to enforce royalties on a blockchain level. Now, for the most part, this works. The issue then becomes socially, the metaphorical genie is sort of out of the bottle here. And we now know that for years, we've been trading assets that were not royalty enforced. And the friction becomes, well, I don't want to trade an asset that has a big royalty on it because now I'm losing a percentage of my potential upside here. So I do think royalty enforcement for creators is a way to increase revenue stream. But I think it's a way to increase. It's a way to diversify. It's a way to make a little more extra cash from something else. The idea that your main source of revenue will become creator royalties, I think is long dead, and I think is dead for good reason. But when you're building custom experiences in a game, let's say you're leveraging Magic Eden's API and you pull it into your app, and you're, in addition to the metadata that is on chain, you're also saying, here's a bunch of off-chain data that we're pulling in. We're going to give you a better buying experience. Based on the items that you have, we think you should purchase this item. As a game, you can do that. You can go that layer. You can get to that layer of depth because a marketplace, we can't do that for 1,000 games. Then I think the idea of paying a 3 or 4, 5% fee for having that additional set of information, I don't care anymore as a consumer. I'm now a gamer. I'm in the game already. I'm no longer a speculator. This app is telling me these are the things that I need. I'm happy to pay that fee. I think this is the way that it'll move for games. You're still going to leverage. Whether or not it's enforceable on blockchain, I think is indifferent long term. As long as you're providing the value prop to spend that extra fee, it'll happen. We've seen a lot of teams start to implement 721C. We've seen a lot of teams start to implement the Solana standard, and I think it's been largely effective, but there is still some social backlash, and I think games are positioned well to solve it by providing better, deeper, more knowledgeable experiences than you would get on a traditional marketplace. It's still powered by those marketplaces from like an infra perspective, because you don't want to build your own marketplace as a game. Building a game is difficult enough. You're also building it in Web3, which makes it even more difficult. You don't want to manage the marketplace experience also. But I think games are positioned well to continue to collect revenue from creator royalties because you can provide value in a way that other NFT collections cannot.
Cool. So Downey has another question that I'll let you think about. I have some thoughts on this too, but are platforms like Magic Eden, do you have the potential to become like the Web3 Steam? It's selling items, but it's the launching off point to become involved in a game and create the social structure around it. So think about that for a moment. There's some other questions I just wanted to respond to super quick. Christopher, you were asking, is there a live broadcast every day? What happened to the code? Sorry you were 2 minutes late. It is just a 2-minute window because the code is for people watching live. So if you're one of the many people watching in replay too, by the way, which is most of our audience, I think sometimes we have like 1,000 or at most 1,200 people watching live, although we're about to crack 1,000 right now. So we might hit an all-time high just on this particular broadcast. But sometimes we get 200,000 views on this after the fact. So if you're one of that 99%, like this is your call to action. Join the live broadcast. Next time you can get the code. But the best part isn't even the code. It's being able to ask people like Matt a live question and be part of the actual conversation, which is super cool. Because we could just record this in YouTube and put it up and just move on. But the fact that this is a live format is what allows for that interaction. So please be here live. You'll get it. And we don't do it quite every day, but at least a couple times a week. We aspire to do it 4 times a week. We also have a high bar for guests, so we don't get to do it every single day, depending on who's available to talk. But usually it's someone at the upper echelons of Web3 or a game studio founder or an AI founder, like someone who's actually like building stuff so that we can talk about it. We don't have a lot of pundits on here just like talking and, shilling. whatever they bought in the background. We don't do that on this program. It's really builders for builders. So going back to the question here, like Web3 Steam, who do you think is positioned for that? Could Magic Eden be it?
I think any marketplace could be the Web3 Steam. I think the question becomes, is that the business that you want to get into? Because fundamentally, it is different. There are a lot of similarities between like a Steam marketplace and a place like Magic Eden or OpenSea. But fundamentally, Steam is a distribution platform. And I think in one way, sure, a Magic Eden is via our Launchpad, right? We help with distribution, we help with amplification. If you've done a good job of building a go-to-market, well, typically we see that becomes a great job when Magic Eden comes in and amplifies the work that you've put in. But those are bespoke offerings, right? We don't launch everybody on Launchpad. We have a self-serve platform where you can kind of just go and launch your NFT. So I think the question about whether or not Magic Eden will become the Web3 Steam is a question more about whether or not we want to build proper distribution arms. And I don't know that the answer to that is yes. I think for a little while it was being considered. I think OpenSea was probably considering it as well. We saw it on marketplaces like Tensor. How do we get an edge? How do we make games want to do this? Because the promise of capturing a game's audience long-term as a marketplace is compelling, right? It's we're seeing it with MapleStory right now, millions and millions of dollars over the course of a couple of weeks in transaction volume. And as a marketplace, that's where you make your money. But I think that distribution layer becomes very difficult to operate as a non-core competency, right? We focus on blockchain tech, we focus on marketplace tech, we have the entertainment products. These are our core competencies. It's where we belong. We have a gaming team. We have a bunch of professional or former professional esports athletes. We deeply understand gaming. Chris Akvahan, our CRO, was a former at Glue, an executive at Glue. He understands the gaming industry. We've got Loco Doco and Psalm, who are Psalm came second at the Fortnite World Cup. He played professional Heroes of the Storm. Yoon in Loco Doco is like one of the most iconic League of Legends players of all time. Gaming is in our DNA as a business, but that doesn't mean that we want to compete with the Steam. I think more and more over time, we've begun to see that maybe the best leader at who becomes the Web3 Steam is probably Steam. And it's probably somebody like an Epic Games. We've seen them become more lax with bringing in these games. That's their core competency. There's no reason why a Steam and a Magic Eden couldn't partner up, or an Epic Games and another marketplace. I think that that's more likely the route that you take. Allow teams to build within their core competencies, build really compelling products. But we've seen more and more teams deploy on Steam. Sparkball is a great example. Bornless is a great example. Wildcard and Project O are great examples. And I think that probably happens. Right now, Steam and Epic have, let's call them muddy rules at best when it comes to how to interact with blockchain. But I think over time that becomes more clear and it becomes less of a barrier for teams to enter. And I think ultimately the Web3 Steam is probably just Steam, powering by maybe a Magic Eden or another marketplace, but it's probably just going to be Steam.
Yeah. And, just a little more on our code. It worked. And people are saying that it worked. Where's Andre's comment here? Andre said it right. Oh yeah, Andre, you got it right. The code was normal, bro. Be faster. What can I tell you? The code redemption is itself a little bit of a mini game. You got to act fast, but we do this regularly. So if you missed it today, now you know the rules of the game. You know to stay listening. You know that it's got to be within 2 minutes. So you're going to get it next time. I know that'll happen. So, Knock, what games are you playing, or what are you excited about in Web3 specifically? Like, you look at a lot of things.
So I am Web3's resident RuneScape addict, and I think by nature of that, I tend to gravitate more towards games that make me feel like I'm playing something similar to RuneScape. So I think Abstract has had an incredible run of really interesting MMO lights sort of play in the last little while. So you had things like Cambria, you saw On-Chain Heroes, Gigaverse is something that people are having a ton of fun playing. And I think it's a compelling business plan because those games are seasonal, right? It's time-based. you don't have to compete with the MMO that the traditional player is playing. Instead, it's a supplementary experience. I can play for a month. I'm focusing on On-Chain Heroes for the next 2 weeks, and then I go back to RuneScape, right? This is like a really fun way of tapping into an existing audience in Web 2. If you're playing an MMO, you're probably a little less adverse to the idea of crypto and blockchain because you've been real money trading since you were a child, probably on sites buying gold and things of that nature. So I think that type of audience is more excited about crypto, or at least more interested in trying it out. So definitely been paying attention a lot to those. Wildcard is I was an advisor at Wildcard. I am now an advisor at the Thousands platform. Paul and Katie, I think, are two of the most compelling human beings in gaming. And the game is a game that me and my former coworker, or my current coworkers in Yoon and Harrison, professional esports, more specifically professional MOBA players, played this game 2 years ago in a state that is much worse than what people are playing today, and very limited in what was available to us. And we played that game, and we had an offline sync shortly after and said, like, this is a team that we need to work with. This is a very compelling title. It is something that is familiar and fresh and new. So I think Wildcard is a great example of this. I think in the same vein, Project O and Sparkball. Project O, if you haven't played a TCG or any sort of similar game, or if you have and it's not been for you, I think you should still try Project O, because I think it's very unique and refreshing in the way that it delivers the card game experience. It's unlike anything that I've seen before. Also, it leverages IP that you already know, public domain IP, and they take really interesting spins on it. I love that team. Kevin Lambert is a regular on both of our shows. And I think is somebody who really deeply understands building video games. So love that. Sparkball is the last one that I'll mention here. I think Sparkball is kind of niche, maybe a little bit out there, but it is the best way I can describe it is like League of Legends meets soccer. You're playing a MOBA, you have team-based mode, you're trying to score goals, first team to X number of goals win the game, etc. It is a refreshing take on a MOBA experience. It's familiar. If you've played MOBA, the barrier to entry is very low because you understand how the mechanics work, and it's just one simple twist. It sounds like maybe it's a game mode of League of Legends, which my original opinion was like, this should have just been a limited time mode on League. But when you play it, you realize there's a lot of depth to it. I think Chandler, who's building the game, is a very interesting person in the space. He's the type of guy who wants this game to succeed no matter what. And they've now teamed up with Dub and the guys at Glitter Cloud Solutions, who I think are excellent advisors in the Web3 gaming space. I know I just named like 6. He asked me for like a couple, but those are games that are definitely, amongst a bunch of others, those are games that are definitely capturing my attention.
Well, that's a good sign that the market is evolving a little bit, because I think if I asked the question 2 years ago, you could talk about examples like Wildcard, but they were just kind of getting started. You couldn't really tell yet, which was kind of the same as like a zillion other projects. And now there's a lot more evidence there that they're serious in building a great product. So that's a bit of a change in Web3 gaming scene. Like, frankly, there was just everything was sort of wrecked a little bit by a lot of rug pulls and NFTs that were launched with no real ability to execute and build a game around it. So it's super encouraging to watch some of these teams come together now. And 2 of the teams that you mentioned have been on this live stream before. So just 2 weeks back, we had Paul Bettner on from Wildcard Alliance. That was an absolutely awesome stream. So if those of you who are watching this now didn't get to see that, go look back through some of the recent episodes, and Oscar will post a link to that as well, just so you can see where to go. And then I forget the exact timing, but we had Kevin from Project O, Coin Games, on several weeks back. That was another one that was great. So I think if you want a good sense of who are the real serious game developers in this, these are guys with literally decades of experience building games. And also in many different categories too. Like, they've worked on AA, AAA games. They've worked on casual titles on mobile. And now they're doing, of all the things that they could be doing, they're working on Web3 games, not because of the hey, we could launch an NFT and fund our company kind of thing that was going on 3 or 4 years ago, but they have traditional financing. They're building up their game. They're focused on gameplay and just a great experience. Sparkball is one that personally I'm going to have to check out. So, hey, if one of the Sparkball team is in the audience right now or you hear about this, hey, come and join on here. We'd love to talk to you about your game. You don't have to be a Beamable customer to be on this stream, to be super clear. Like, I will talk to anybody building cool shit. You're welcome to come on. But it just so happens the Project O and Wildcard Alliance are two of the customers that we're super proud of building on Beamable, using us for multiplayer and matchmaking and social systems and all that stuff that you need to build a great game. Speaking of which, Knock, like what, we're getting towards the end. What goes into a great game right now? Like what is the meta as you see it for building and launching a great Web3 game beyond just being a great game? Because we had 19,000 games ship on Steam last year. Like it's already hard to stand out no matter what you do. So like how do Web3 specific game developers survive?
Yeah. So building a good game, table stakes at this point, right? One of the things I love to say about games in general and gamers is there are only two types of games in the eyes of a hardcore gamer, and it's garbage that I hate and garbage that I play. And I think understanding that no matter what you do, you're going to piss people off is a very important piece of the puzzle here. To find success in Web3, I think you look at some of the successful teams. We'll lean in on the teams that we specifically spoke about, and I think that there are two very distinct categories. On one side, you have the on-chain heroes, the Cambrias, the Gigaverse. These are teams that are very Web3 native. They are true degens. They understand what makes the speculators excited, what makes Web3 degens happy, and they build games and experiences for them. So as a Web3 degen, I get all the things that I want out of it from like a speculation POV, and I get to play a fun game. That's why these teams have been so successful. They've leaned into the fact that they are true Web3 natives. They understand how the market moves. They understand how to create incentives that are compelling. And on top of all of that, they've created fun, seasonal, time-based games that don't take too much attention away from other things that you're doing. Excellent way to succeed if you're able to do it. Very difficult, insanely difficult, but a great business model if you can figure it out. The second way, I think, is to deliver something that is relatively unique. So Project O, Wildcard, and Sparkball are all genre blending games. They do a little more than your traditional MOBA or card game. They're not too difficult to pick up and understand, but there's a lot of depth. It's very difficult to be very good at those games because of that depth. So I think the barrier to entry is low. Adding another element is very compelling. So you attract eyeballs from the traditional Web2 space, and then they have found ways to create their Web3 ecosystem as almost a siloed experience that amplifies or augments your experience within game, but is not core to the gameplay, right? So in the case of a Project O or a Wildcard, it's about collecting, it's about distribution of cards, it's about getting more access to more things, and it's all of this metagame that you can participate if you choose to do so. But if you don't want to do so, you can still get everything that you want to get out of the game from just playing the game itself. I think that these are teams who have bended or are actively bending the rules on what is allowed and what should be possible with Web3 tech, right? They are creating an experience that allows you to participate while you're playing the game, as well as when you're watching the game, as well as when you're speculating on the game. And you can participate in one or all three of those categories, but you're never missing out from the experience if you choose to only do one of those things. That's compelling. So you either have to go full-blown true Web3 degen, or you have to find interesting ways to tie in a Web3 component and ecosystem with in my opinion, a genre bender that does something that you cannot do in traditional gaming markets. That to me is very compelling. And if you look at the teams that are at least capturing my attention, they all fall into one of those two categories. There's nobody in the middle of like, own your skins and it's just the same thing as Call of Duty. I don't see a lot of those capturing attention. I do see teams that are doing things that are not possible in Web 2 doing it here. A great example, I'll give you one more. I know we're approaching time. Parallel Colony, I think, is one of the most interesting games in the ecosystem. It is a game that literally cannot be built on Web2 tech. It is a bunch of AI agents. They're autonomous. They operate their colony. They can mint assets. They can trade assets. They can do a bunch of things that's only possible with Web3. Those are the types of teams that get me excited. And I think you have to be in one of those two categories.
Okay. Awesome input to the audience here, because we have a lot of game developers in the audience as well. And I hope you internalize that. So either lean hard into Web3, go full degen, do something that's actually crypto native, and or like do something really innovative. Like you mentioned the 19,000 games on Steam. Like, let's face it, most of those games are shallow clones of existing game type, but people are looking for something new. They're playing games for that surprise and delight moment where they're going to have a new experience. So this is your opportunity to do that. Life's too short. You should build something fun that's going to stand the test of time. Do it through innovation. And if you roll the dice and it wasn't quite the thing that resonated, guess what? That's what game development is, and you deserve all the credit for making an earnest effort at trying it. So hope to see you building those games. Hope that you join the likes of Wildcard Alliance and Project O and some of the games we talked about during this stream. Go build a great game. And if we can help at Beamable with an infrastructure that gives you multiplayer and back-end systems so that you can just focus on the fun, which is all that your players are going to care about. Frankly, your player doesn't give a shit that it's built on Beamable. They only care that the game is great. You're going to have a lot more time and money to spend on that. So please check out the games that are being built on us, and check this live stream out again, because we'll be talking about those games and others that have yet to be discussed on the live stream in upcoming episodes. But that's it. We've run through yet another hour. So want to thank you so much for being part of this, Knock, and thank to the audience as well. Like, you guys have very valuable time. You could do literally anything with it, but you sat here through an hour, and there's 1,135 of you watching live. Hope to see more of you participate live next time around. So if you are in the replay, come join that stream and claim the code next time, because you get that 2 minutes to be able to do it. But thanks again, Knock. This has been awesome. Great conversation. I have a feeling we're going to have some amazing extracts out of this and some little sound bites that will spread around.
Well, appreciate you having me on, guys.